Hello, my name is J.R. Garcia. I'm a Solutions Engineering Director here at ANM, and I'm here to talk a little bit today about SDN, or Software Defined Network. We'll talk about what it is, why it's important, and how you could potentially use SDN to do more with less. Now, before we get into SDN, I think it's important to talk about why SDN exists in the first place. So the background for SDN really goes back to the DevOps. Now, for those of you that are unaware, DevOps is really the integration of two teams that have historically been very separate, our development teams and our operations teams. Now, these two teams use a lot of different tools, and those tools talk to each other, typically through APIs and through quite a bit of automation. Now, this is a great way to develop software, manage environment. The problem comes when we try and integrate our traditional network designs into this DevOps model. So take a look at that. Now, we draw out our typical network. Got some routers. We got a core, access layer, right? Now, let's say we have an application that's just been created, and that application now needs resources from the network. So we need to configure IP addressing, VLANs. We need to configure security policy. We need to configure load balancing. We need to configure quality of service, right? All the things that are required for an application to get out to the network and communicate with the thing it needs to communicate to. Now, historically, we have our network engineer here off to the side. What they would do is take all those requirements for that application, and then they would log into each one of these devices individually, and then configure them via CLI, SNMP, basically manual configuration to do all the things that I talked about. Now that takes time. It can be very time consuming. And then on the flip side, if that application gets turned down, that network administrator now has to log back into all the things that they configured earlier and remove all that configuration. So it can be a bit of a pain. Now, if our administrator now wants to use things like APIs for automation to be able to configure all of that stuff, we run into some problems. Most modern network equipment does allow for API configuration, but again, all of these network devices are effectively as intelligent as one another because both the control plane and data plane lives on each physical device, right? So this device is just as smart as the other one. They're effectively autonomous. So if this guy needs to send a packet up, it does a calculation, sends it up to the next device in the path, that does another calculation, and then sends it upwards. So if we want to do an API call, now we have to effectively do multiple API calls to all the devices in the network that are required to configure the network requirements for that application. And same thing from an automation standpoint. If we want to create an automation script to do all the things for us, again, we'll have to create different scripts based on the type of device, the syntax, so the configuration, and things like that. And that is because, again, the control plane and data plane lives effectively on the physical device. Now, getting the software-defined networking, what SDN does is it effectively implements a controller that allows us to separate our control plane from the data plane. So now the controller owns the control and management. And then on the physical devices, we just have the data plane. So the physical devices forwards the traffic still, but the controller now holds all its configuration and policy. So if our network administrator has those same network requirements, they now just have one singular place to do an API call, one singular place to do an automation script, and what they do is configure a policy now instead of individual configuration, and the controller reaches out pushes that policy, pushes that configuration down to all the devices that it controls. So for those of you, as an example, that are familiar with SD-WAN, this would be your cloud controller that sits up in the cloud. And then it pushes down policy down all the routers that it controls. There are many different types of SDN platforms. There are SDN platforms for the WAN, for campus environments, and also for the data center. If you need help navigating all that and seeing where SDN might be able to fit in your environment, send an email to info@anm.com or talk to your local account team. Thank you.